Well, once again, thank you so much for joining our webinar this evening. Really great to see you. I'm very conscious that 40 minutes of your time at this stage of term, or frankly, any stage of term, is a sacrifice. But I very much hope that by the end of this time together, you'll have a great deal of value from our time together. My name's Joe Sidders. I call myself the Pilgrim Coach. More on that a little bit later. If you're here today, chances are you've reached a point in your career that feels less like a path and more like a crossroads. You've been successful, you've moved up through the ranks, perhaps you've had a nagging feeling that you're on a conveyor belt moving towards some destination which you're a little ambivalent about. You're not entirely sure that you've been intentional about your choices. If that sounds familiar, you're in exactly the right place. What I want to try and do today is to help you to move from feeling like you're on a conveyor belt to having agency over your choices, from a crossroads to a clearer path. What I'm going to do is introduce to you some of the tools and techniques that I use in my group and one-to-one coaching, so that you can take them away and use them to yourself and reflect on where you are. You will know that you've joined this webinar as what's called a viewer, because I wanted to honor my promise that this was a confidential space, so you can't see anybody else on the call and they can't see you. But I do just want to offer a possibility that if you want to have a bit more interactivity, perhaps some of the questions I'm asking later, if you want to get into those and you want to become what's called a participant, then feel free to raise your virtual hand now, and I can change your status to participant. But just to be clear, that if you do that, then you will be more obviously on the call and your name will appear. So very happy for you to stay anonymous. That's absolutely fine. But if you'd like to be more interactive in this webinar, please do raise your virtual hand. I'll leave you to think about that for a moment as I just introduce myself a little bit more. So, as I said, my name's Joe Sidders. I had 27 years in education as a teacher, physics teacher, head of department, senior leader. Here I am as a bright-eyed, bushy-tailed new teacher waiting to go up to my first appointment at Wellington College. Still looking a bit like a university student. No wonder I struggled a little bit in the classroom to begin with. But anyway, I went up to Wellington College, and you'll see some pictures there of the schools that I've been to since: Uppingham School, St Paul's in Sao Paulo in Brazil, Bryanston, Moncton Combe, and finally a tour of duty at Repton School in Derbyshire as deputy head academic. Achieved some great results, really lucky to do that with pupils and colleagues. Led some very diverse teams, set up the IB program at Bryanston, for instance. So really enjoyed my career, had a great time doing that. But more importantly, I know what it feels like to be at a crossroads in my career, because I spent 5 years grappling with whether I wanted to become a head. I reached that point after sort of 3 or 4 years as a deputy head at Moncton. Gone through one development cycle, planning cycle. As you know, you come out the other end. Had achieved many of the goals that we'd set ourselves, and so we were starting to look at the next cycle. Really excited about the future. Had unfinished business, but I did sort of peek a little bit beyond where we were now, a little further ahead. What did that bring? I asked myself. What was after this? Well, at the time, I felt that headship was the next thing. Due to the next thing, and that was as a result of a number of influences on me. One was the sort of external expectations of colleagues. Those around me were sort of saying, "You, Joe, you know, they look at the TES and they say, well, you're applying for that headship." That would come up a number of times. It seemed that other people thought that I'd be able to do the job. Certainly it was some expectations of my father, who had got over the idea that I wasn't going to be a wealthy doctor, but certainly now that I'd gone into teaching, clearly the thing that I ought to be doing is making sure that I become a head as soon as I could. And of course, the education career structure just feels very narrow. It just funnels towards headship, doesn't it? And it rather feels like a bit of a binary choice at that stage. You know, stick at deputy till you retire, or become a head. And those were the feelings that I had. But I felt unsettled and not at peace with this path. It felt like a conveyor belt. Anyway, so as I said, a number of people encouraged me to apply for headships, and so I was lucky to reach the latter stages of some of those processes a few times. One such case, I remember getting some feedback from the recruiter who said, you know, you're saying all the right things, Joe. Your CV is great. You know, you've got lots of things to offer, but you need more energy in your answers. You need to sound like you actually want to do the job. I thought, fair enough. That sounds like some decent feedback. So the next process that I got into, I was lucky enough to get to some of the final rounds of interviews, and I was ready to implement this advice. And as I opened my mouth to answer some questions, I realized that the reason I didn't sound like I wanted the job was because I didn't want the job. So after some reflection, I decided I'd withdraw from that process, but I felt an immense relief that I'd finally gained clarity on the fact that this was something that I did not want to do. Headship for me was not right. I stepped off the conveyor belt. I regained agency. It did take me a number of years after that to work out what I did want to do, but at least I'd worked out what I didn't want to do. Now, I'm not here to tell you what to do. Your destination is your own, and sorry, and I'm not certainly one of those coaches you see on social media. You know, there's one that people who are very clear that what you need to do is get out of education. Now, that may be the right thing for you, and it may not, but I'm definitely not here to tell you which of those is your destination, your solution. Your conveyor belt is not my conveyor belt. But if you want to regain that agency, then what I'll give you today is a framework to do that in. It's absolutely not a magic wand. So just to be clear here, I'm not saying this is a simplistic solution, but I do hope that it will take you less than the 5 years or so that it took me. There's no shortcut, but today you'll get some clarity about what the next step will make your journey more effective. A little bit about why I call myself the pilgrim coach. Really, I call myself that because I think the pilgrimage metaphor is a really powerful one, because on a pilgrimage, the journey and the destination are intimately related. Insights from the journey enrich and influence the destination. If you've experienced any coaching in the past, you'll know that a lot of coaching is very goals orientated and focuses largely on the destination. Now, that's of course important to have your goals in focus, and indeed, of course, a pilgrimage is nothing if it's not focused on the destination of the pilgrimage. But you wouldn't get on a plane to Santiago de Compostela if that was your destination, because of course the journey is just as important as the destination. My coaching in the same way puts equal weight on the journey and the destination. The other thing though, as a fellow traveler, I walk alongside the pilgrims I coach. I don't offer advice, I don't judge, I don't set the pace. I do offer space to think, I do hold clients to account, I do check in that they're making progress. So today we're going to do a little brief excursion, as it were, rather than a full pilgrimage. I'm going to provide you with some tools for further exploration, leading hopefully to renewed purpose and agency. But before we dive into that framework that I'm going to offer, let's quickly ground ourselves in the shared experience that brought us here today. That feeling of ambivalence that perhaps you have about the next step of your career is incredibly common. And of course, with social media and professional platforms like LinkedIn, it's very easy to look at everybody else in this space and think, you know, they're not on a conveyor belt. You know, they're in a jet plane, they're on a rocket ship. They know exactly where they're going. Why can't I feel like that? Well, believe me, that a number of senior leaders in schools that I've spoken to about this, I'd reassure you that that's simply not the case. They may be projecting that image, and I suspect that we all do that from time to time. But that sense of ambivalence about perhaps headship being the next step is pretty common. The other thing, of course, is that the conveyor belt is an incredibly seductive place to be. It offers that clear path to where it's going. But it is a dangerous place because it can lead away from what you truly want. Now, it may turn out that the destination that it's taking you to is the same destination that you want. And of course, that's okay too. I'm not here, as I say, to dictate what destination is the right destination for you. But I guess from the fact that you're here, that form of decision making isn't very satisfactory. And again, thinking of this as a pilgrimage and how valuable the journey is alongside the destination means that you can take courage to pause and look beyond the obvious next step. And if the next step becomes that obvious next step, headship, then brilliant. And it'll mean that you lead as a head with much more authenticity and less anxiety, and it'll all be good. So without further ado, let me introduce you to the framework that I developed to help do this. So I used the first letters of the word pilgrim to describe the 7 stages that I think are important in considering your situation. Now, it's a very versatile framework. It's not just for looking at your career, but it can be applied to a number of different situations. But the key thing is it's about aligning your actions with your values. The full framework is deep and takes time and a number of sessions. So today we're just going to have time for briefly to have a look at the P and the I, which are foundational to the rest of it. But let me quickly tell you what the other ones are. So P is for pause, to pinpoint where I am. So we might be characterized by that question, where am I? I is for important, inquiring into your values, purpose, priorities. So you might ask the question, what's important to me? L is for liberate. It's about dreaming, looking around and seeing what the possibilities might be. You might ask the question, what are my options? G is for grounded or ground, about realism, exploring and getting more details about a few of those options. So it might be asking the question, what options am I most curious about? R is for relationships. Of course, very few of us operate in a vacuum. And we might ask the question, what's the impact of these choices on those closest to me? That second I is for intention. So we might ask the question, what step am I going to take? And finally, M is for monitor, because all your best work is done between coaching sessions. And so the question you might ask yourself is, what's the impact? So that's the full framework. But as I say, we're going to just have a look at 2 this evening. P for pause and pinpoint where we are, and I for what is important to you. What are your values? What are your priorities? So firstly, pause to pinpoint. At the heart of this, it is time to sit and reflect on where you are. And as I think back at my situation, that was crucially the step that I absolutely missed. I did not build in time to think about what I was doing and how I was making decisions. Coaching itself is often about asking simple but powerful questions. Now, why do they work? Well, our brains are wired to respond to challenges, aren't they? So when we're asked questions, that sort of fires synapses in our brain, which just a statement or someone telling us, giving us advice, or us just sitting and thinking doesn't achieve. So questions are powerful thought triggers for us. So as we move into this first sort of phase of a little bit of coaching together, I'm going to ask you 4 questions. And I encourage you to sit and reflect on each question. And if you're in a situation where you could actually verbalize your responses, assuming you're not in a room with other people, that would be really helpful, because actually one of the powerful things about coaching is getting thoughts out of your head and into words. So if you are in a situation where you can verbalize, even just to yourself, but out loud, that would be really, really helpful. So here's the first question I'm going to ask. What brings you here today? And between each question, I'm just going to pause, give you a bit of space to think, and then, if you can, verbalize your response. Second question I want to ask is this: what makes that important now? Third question: how do you want to feel by the end of this session today? And finally, if you did feel like that at the end, what impact would that have? So one of the things about coaching is that there are spaces, there are pauses to think and consider. And it'd be interesting just for you to reflect on some of those answers that perhaps you came up with that surfaced as you thought about those questions, and you might want to jot down some answers to those. Coaching is a process of uncovering thoughts and feelings. We might call it making explicit what is implicit. Okay, so questions. Questions are a powerful way of getting us to think. Thoughts triggers, as I call them. But we also have some tools in coaching. I'm going to introduce you to one now. It's called the Wheel of Life. Here it is. It's a very simple model, because of course career is tied to all our other aspects of life, and those of us who are in schools that have a very high sense of community, it's very difficult to unpick our career from our life much of the time, and often that's part of the trouble, isn't it, in terms of the careers that we've chosen. And so as we think about our career, it's actually useful to think about our whole lives. Now, this wheel just divides our life up into 8 different areas or aspects of our life. I'm sure we could divide it in many other ways, and there's nothing special about the number 8. But what it offers us is a way to reflect on each of these areas. And what we do is score each of these areas out of 10, depending on how satisfied we are with that area. So reflect on each of these areas and score it out of 10 on how satisfied we are with it. What I'm going to do now is give you perhaps 3 or 4 minutes just to consider this, have a look at these. You won't have time, obviously, to do all 8. Maybe choose 3 or perhaps 4 of these aspects, and just do that. Think, how satisfied am I with that area of my life, and put a number out of 10 on it. I'm just going to go off video for 3 or 4 minutes just to let you consider some of those questions as you look at this wheel of life. I'll be back in 3 or 4 minutes. Okay, great. Well, I don't know what you came up with in terms of your scores, and if we were in a coaching session, then we might explore what you thought for each of those sections and ask questions like, what led to that score? What patterns do you see? Where are the imbalances? What surprises you about the scores that you've put down? And through that reflection, you'd uncover insights into where you are now, which of course is what P is all about in our Pilgrim framework. So that's P. But moving on to I then. I, for what's important to you. What are your values? I'll come to this slide in a moment, but what truly matters to you? Making it explicit your implicit values is crucial for authentic decision making. It may be that you feel that you know your values really well, but actually even values conscious individuals often find it difficult to articulate what those values are. So you're sort of clear about them, as it were, in your head implicitly. But when you're asked to articulate them, you may find it a bit more difficult. So here's a useful exercise for getting those values a bit clearer and articulating them. It's called the burning house exercise. Imagine your house is burning down. Now, all the individuals, all the living things in that house are safe. So they've all escaped. So family, pets, all escaped. So you don't need to worry about them. But what I want you to do is to think about the non-living things in your house. What 3 objects would you save from the flames? You see this rather grisly individual that AI gave me as this image has rescued from his house. What are the 3 things that you would rescue from the flames? So I'm going to give you a few moments to have a think a little bit about that. Now, again, if we were in a coaching session, we might reflect on those 3 objects that you've chosen, or they reveal about your values and your priorities. But I want to take that sort of perhaps a step further now at in this webinar, and just have a think about perhaps a metaphorical version of this. Imagine your career is on fire, metaphorically, as it were. And as you reflect upon aspects of your career, what would be the 3 aspects of your current role or your job which you would save from the flames as you move on to your next career choice? So as this one burns up, what would you grasp from it to take into your next career move? Well, again, that bit of thinking there might just reveal a little bit about what is important to you, what your priorities, what your values are. And as I said, for me, those are really crucial for being clear about those, to be clear about any decision making that comes after that. Now, these exercises, these P and this I, part of my framework, are a little window into coaching. And coaching involves powerful questions to unlock our thinking, to verbalize our thoughts. And of course, any space for this sort of thinking is useful. 40 minutes really isn't long enough to do it justice, and as I'm sure you've felt rushed as I've gone through these things. The thing about a coaching session is that it gives us more time for that. So I want to tell you a little bit about something that I'm doing in a few weeks' time. I'm calling it the Leadership Crossroads Pilgrimage. So unlike this 40-minute webinar, it's over a longer period of time. It's over 8 weeks, this course. And really, it's just a time for you to reflect on your current circumstances and think about those. It's a group coaching program, so you have a chance to work with others in a similar situation, share ideas, share experiences, share your thinking. It would be 5 90-minute sessions. So we'd meet on a Tuesday evening from 6:30 to 8 over 5 separate sort of roughly fortnightly over those 8 weeks. We go through each of the letters of the Pilgrim framework through those 5 weeks. You'll notice that 5 and 7 are different. There are 7 letters in Pilgrim, and so 2 of those letters, the framework, you would do one on your own outside the sessions, and one to look back at the end. But it will be a structured and group coaching session led by me to help you to think about this in more depth. It's limited to 8 people, and so that means that we can really do some in-depth work together, and it would have that intimate feeling that would build a trust between us, so that you can share your thoughts with others and help each other as you journey on this pilgrimage. It's for deputies and assistant heads looking for greater clarity and agency. It starts on the 14th of October. It's an investment of a few hours to save months or even years of indecision, as it was for me. That's my That's why I want to particularly share this opportunity. It's an investment of £499 for those 7.5 hours of coaching. So that's just over £65 an hour, which represents really great value. As you probably know, you can spend many times more than that for coaching, and coaching often goes into three figures, or almost always three figures in an hour. And of course, there's always the cost of not doing this work, which I guess is one of the reasons you might feel that you are here. Here's a couple of testimonials I thought I'd share with a couple of people that I've worked with in the past. So Tim, who's a senior leader at Harrow School, I worked with him. He said it was an absolute pleasure working with Joe. He has that rare ability to truly listen, understand, and ask the right questions, helping you gain complete clarity of thought. His sessions are genuinely illuminating and have a lasting impact. Warm, empathetic, and insightful, Joe cuts through the noise to get to the heart of the issue and guide effective decision making. And Damien, who was a client I worked with, who's the head of faculty at Wells Cathedral School. I had the privilege of working with Joe as my coach, and I cannot recommend him highly enough. Joe's an engaging, kind, and curious professional who has a remarkable ability to ask just the right questions, gently but insightfully pushing my thinking further. He seemed to understand my motivations often before I did, and helped me uncover blind spots that had been holding me back. His calm, courteous, and deeply professional manner inspired trust from the start. So over the course of this 8 weeks and 5 sessions, we'd cover all the Pilgrim framework so that you get clarity on where you're going. The QR code there it will give you a link to more information. So if you want to find out about that or book in, then that's the link to use.